And for example, even you said that you feel that you're talking with celebrity. Let's say, no one, let's say 20 years, that wouldn't be a case.
Right.
So in this sense, I think we do make a progress, and I think we will get there eventually.
An interesting snippet from person who I have not revealed to you yet. Actually, we did talk about this the other day.
You revealed it to me.
First of all, this is Chris. I'm a data scientist and game designer.
I'm Kayla. I am a television writer.
And this is Cult or Just Weird, where we talk about cults. Or
just weirds.
Maybe they're just weird. I don't know. So, well, actually, in this one, we're not answering a cult or just weird. This is actually, we're going to talk about something.
Oh no, are we deviating again?
We're deviating again. I'll get to that, but we're going to talk about a cult or just weird that we already talked about this season. But first, business. I don't know if you have any business. I have a business again. It's actually the same exact type of business as last episode. We have a new patron, Jenny Lamb.
Oh, I stepped on her name. Sorry.
You stepped on the person's
yay.
name? No.
I was trying to say yay.
I'll say it again. Jenny Lamb, thank you for becoming our patron and for supporting us. We really appreciate it.
We do.
There might also... So here's the thing I was thinking is there might...
Is this for... Are you talking to the podcast or me?
Both. There might be other patrons that sign up between now and when this episode goes live because we're recording... This is like as far in advance as we've recorded in... I think since we started doing the show.
When does this episode come out?
2 weeks from now. Yeah. We usually record
2 days before.
Like 2 days before. We're doing it 2 weeks before.
So if anybody signs up between October 21st and by the time the podcast comes out, we'll get you next time.
Yeah.
We're not ignoring you. We're just being proactive.
Yeah, proactive thank you, and then we will also say your name. All right, so that's really all I have for business. What about you? Do you have anything?
We got some big business.
We do?
Yeah, we got our COVID booster shots yesterday.
Oh yeah, so we feel like shit right now.
Yeah. I did not have any side effects from the first two, and this one's knocked me on my ass. And even though I'm sitting here like in a sweatshirt in 90-degree weather, I can't imagine not having gotten it.
Yeah, and you're shivering, and you're just in pain.
I don't feel good.
I do feel like I got hit by a truck again. The second shot we did Pfizer. The second one I felt like I got hit by an 18-wheeler.
Right.
This one's more like a Ford F-150, like it still hurts, but I'm not like lying in the couch moaning.
That's me.
Thing.
It is
but totally
extremely worth it. Extremely worth it. I am glad to be feeling this pain today.
Yeah.
We're very lucky to have been able to get our boosters so quickly.
Yeah. We talked in the Matthew Remski episode about like sometimes the emotional. I think I had another little bit of an emotional reaction to the booster.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
I didn't because she did it so fast.
Oh, she did do it very fast, but I definitely had like I feel a little bit safer again. Like sort of like after the first one. Like I didn't really have it the second time, but I think it's because we had like that Delta stuff in between, and now and so I think that like having the third one kind of relieved some of that long-term tension. I don't know.
Anyway, go get vaccinated, guys. Get your boosters if you can.
Yes, please do protect yourselves, protect your loved ones and your friends. Kayla.
Yes.
I know we say this a lot. I don't know. Maybe it's true every time, but I am so freaking excited about this one.
Okay.
I'm so stoked for this
I know
episode.
You are. Yeah, me too. I mean, same. Yeah.
So first, a little bit of context. As you guys, listeners, heard in the episode's Cold Open, we've got another interview format this week. Now, I know you might be thinking, another interview format? This isn't about a cult or a just weird either, which
you guys are lazy.
Yeah, okay, fair.
True.
We are lazy indeed. But allow me to assuage those concerns. First of all, this time we actually are talking about a particular group, as I mentioned to Kayla a few minutes ago. The catch is that it's a group we've already talked about, in fact, quite recently on the show. Second of all, this is just like one of those things that I just couldn't pass up or push off or even restrict to Patreon. I did think about making this a bonus episode on Patreon, but I turned it around in my head and I thought, no, it's just too cool and provides too much good information and even some corrections.
We got to bring it to the masses then.
About a recent episode. So I just decided, it had to be a regular episode of our show. Third and finally, don't worry, we'll wave the criteria paper around at the end regardless, I promise, since I know that's really what you're here for.
And then we will be back to a regularly scheduled episode next time. I've got something brewing.
You got something brewing?
Basically, I just want to say that if I feel like it's been a little heavy around here recently.
Well, I don't know.
We've been talking about QAnon again. We've been talking about the climate crisis. We've been talking about, swindling of bereaved mothers.
But we've been talking about helpers.
We have been talking about helpers.
It was good to, I think you talked about this in the Matt Remski episode a few weeks ago. It was good to talk to Travis View instead of just talking about the shitty shit QAnon.
Yes.
It was good to talk to Matt Remski rather than just talking about the shitty shit yoga Nazis. And similarly today, I think it's going to be good to talk to this person that I'm going to reveal in just a moment.
Ooh.
Instead of just talking about the shitty shit climate crisis.
Right.
Plus, I also add the guy that talked to me was talking to me all the way from Siberia.
Ooh.
Which, that just by itself is worth putting on the regular podcast feed, right?
Anybody from Siberia.
Yeah. If the Siberia bit didn't give it away, then that means you probably haven't listened to our recent episode about Pleistocene Park, which was the 12th episode of this third season. You should definitely go check that out, either before or after you listen to this interview. The reason I was talking to someone from Siberia is because that someone is none other than Nikita Zimov himself, the director and lead researcher at Pleistocene Park.
Hell yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm sorry. I just, tell the listeners what my face looks right now.
Goofy.
No.
Goofy.
It's goofy, but also...
excitedly goofy.
Ear-to-ear smile. I'm always goofy. That's not
true.
A change. Anyway, it was basically talking to a bona fide celebrity. And I know we've talked to some pretty well-known people on here, but I don't know, getting to talk to someone who is not only a scientist doing real on-the-ground empirical research, adding to a body of knowledge that is critical to our survival as a species, that just felt different. It was cool as hell. And to bring it sort of together with what we were talking about in the last few episodes, it was good to talk to a helper instead of just talking about climate crisis. It was good to talk about someone that is absolutely eyes deep in trying to help and trying to solve it.
The best part about this interview is when you finished it.
Yeah.
You came dancing out into the living room.
I did a little jig.
You did a little jig. I was on a Zoom support group.
Oh, sorry. Whoops.
In the middle of people talking about their horrible traumas.
Oh no.
And you come out dancing.
Oh no. I'm sorry.
It was
shit.
the best. It was the best. So I'm very excited for this interview. Mostly because that moment, it turned it all around.
My B.
No, it was not a B. It was a G. It was a good.
Okay.
You're good.
Thanks. And Kayla, and dear listeners, lest you just think this is going to be a recap of episode 12. No, my friends. Mr. Zimov. Mr. Zimov actually sharpened my knowledge about his park, climate science, and Pleistocene rewilding quite a bit.
Wow.
And if that wasn't enough, he dropped a sick wisdom bomb in the form of a parable.
Oh my God.
We were talking, I shit you not.
Please just give me the parable right now. Inject it into my veins.
It is a vein injectable parable. We'll get to that. So if you're not excited for this interview, I can't do nothing for you, son. That's why I had to produce this as a regular episode, even though last episode we did an interview too. So, are you excited?
I'm so excited.
Ready to go?
I'm so ready to go.
All right then. Straight from the other side of the world, in Novosibirsk, Russia, Cultist Weird's interview with Nikita Zimov. Hello?
Yes, hi.
Hey, Mr. Zimov. How you doing?
Yes, hi. Quite good, thank you.
All right, so first things first, if you could introduce yourself for our listeners.
Yes, my name is Nikita Zimov, and I'm director of the Pleistocene Park.
I'm sorry, I'm just so excited to have you. It kind of feels like having a celebrity on, because I already did an episode on Pleistocene Park for our podcast. So, I've already done a ton of research on Pleistocene Park. All of our listeners, anybody who's listening to this will be familiar with it. But it's really cool to have you here. Could you maybe give us a summary of what Pleistocene Park is?
Yeah, so Pleistocene Park is a scientific experiment to restore high productive grazing ecosystems in the Arctic, and through that mitigate climate change.
That is a really good summary. As much information as there is out there about Pleistocene Park, I'm impressed with how succinct your summary was.
Well, I spent the last 15 years doing that, and I had enough time to come up to a concise phrase.
Right, that makes sense. So you said as part of the goal is to mitigate climate change. So I wanted to ask you what you think is the primary goal of Pleistocene Park, because there's a lot going on. So is it primarily about climate change and proving the model that animals can protect permafrost, or is it more of like a general environmental science project, or is it more about rewilding and bringing about mammoths? Like, what would you say is the main goal?
I think the main goal is even a little bit different. I think the main goal is to learn how to manage our planet, ecosystems, nature efficiently and sustainably, and to learn how to exist on our planet on sustainable manner. So that's kind of the more broad demand, because it's not only about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Because so far our civilization and humans in general, we are pretty much acting as a cancer on our planet. And so we are pretty much destroying everything that we are using. We are using up all the non-renewable resources. And clearly we got the situation quite a complicated time. So now the climate change is coming. We are going to get low on many resources which we heavily rely on. So our 7 billion people is relying on the harvesters, which are fueled by oil, and the oil is going to be depleted soon. And there is many other problems. And so far, we didn't do a good job at living sustainably on the planet. And I think one of the tasks for us is to learn how to do it efficiently. And I believe that if we will have rich ecosystems which will be sustainable, we will be able to use those ecosystems for our benefit. And it's about climate change. It's just about maybe sustainable use and effective use. And so the overall goal is do better for the humankind in general.
That's a great answer. And you used a phrase there, cancer on the planet, and you also talk about sustainability. So one of the things we talked about on the show was, who is environmentalism for? Like who is the main beneficiary when we do environmental science? So would you say that it's more about saving the planet, or it's more about like being able to save ourselves, like to be able to continue to exist?
Yes, I think second. Yeah, I would say that I do it for kids.
Yeah. I think that comes up a lot for me, where it's like, there seems to be sometimes like this moral or ethical statement about like saving the planet, saving the environment, when it's really is about, actually, it's more about saving ourselves. Because, the planet, even after we kill ourselves off, the planet's there's still going to be life. There's still going to be Earth. Right. So the question is, are we going to be around to be able to see that? Like, and that's up to us.
Well, yeah, but it's a question about diversity of life we will live on the planet.
Right.
Yeah, but indeed, it's definitely about humans anyway. So for example, I'm dealing with animals, but I'm not the biggest animal fan. For me, animals are tools.
Yeah.
So those are tools to make this ecosystem and to benefit humans. I would love to find a way to get benefits for all of us. So both for humans and for animals. So that's what we're trying to do. But the primary goal is, of course, I care about humankind.
Right, in the future generations. Yeah. You mentioned diversity. I think people don't really, actually, I won't even say people, I'll say me. When I first learned about Pleistocene Park, I don't think I had a good appreciation for how important biodiversity was. And this is, I care about the environment, and I still don't think I realized how important it was to have for example, the grazing animals that you have brought back to Siberia. Can you talk a little bit about why biodiversity is so important?
Well, it's in this sense, there is two types of ecosystems. What we have in the Arctic right now is a very low productive ecosystems with a very low rates of photosynthesis, low rates of turnover of nutrients, of carbon. And we want to exchange, we are not creating mammoth type ecosystem. We are not cloning something that was dead. We are trying to create something that would function on the same principles. And grazers are important because they are dramatically accelerating the cycles of the nutrients and carbon and biocycle in general. And the main reason for that is that they accelerate decomposition rates of above ground biomass. So if without animals, the average nitrogen lifetime cycle in the tundra is something 120 years or something like that. So it takes 120 years for the plant to pick up the nitrogen, decompose, return back. And in the grazing ecosystems, it can be around 1 year. So the animals will eat the grass, digest, and return nutrients 24 hours later. And in this sense, it can be picked up. So you dramatically increase the productivity. Also, and after that, the more diverse is your ecosystem, usually the more effective it is. It's kind of a general rule, and more sustainable it is. So the more niches you have, the better, and it have to be complete ecosystem. So right now we are bringing mostly herbivores, but definitely my project will not succeed if you will not introduce predators into the system. That's like the main must-have.
What is it about the diversity though that makes it, you said effective? Is it just that it makes that ecosystem more resilient to outside shock and change?
That's true, and also the more different types of animals and life you have, the kind of more effectively you can consume all the productivity.
I see. Okay, so there's different. If there's a niche that's not filled, then there's like a energy productivity input that is essentially going to waste. Is that kind of
yes
interesting? I see. I'm learning new stuff right now. This is awesome. So my next question is: do you consider Pleistocene Park to have been a successful project so far? And then as a follow-up to that, do you think that we truly will be able to save Earth's permafrost from melting using this method, or is it not enough or too late?
Well, if we are saying as a goal measure of success, creation of ecosystem which is big enough to have meaningful impact on the climate, then no, we are not nearly successful. So we are still in the beginning, first stages, and from practical point of view, we are not developing as fast as we would want to develop. Of course, I think when 15 years ago my dad invited, or maybe 20 years, come on, how many years? 20 years ago when my dad invited me to come back to the Arctic, and I came back, well, it was first year in university, and then I said that, yes, I will come back, and 3 years later I returned. And I think if I would know how complicated all that would be, maybe I wouldn't be so happily accepting my dad's invitation. So, the problem, no one has ever really restored the ecosystems entirely. People so far been, sometimes introducing this animal or that animal and creating an ecosystem and changing the whole setup of the kind of the functionality of the ecosystems. And it's not only about animals, it's mostly about plants, it's about soils. And it's a very complicated task, and there is a lot we don't know. And of course, over the time of the development of the park, there have been failures and or success wasn't as good as we wanted that to be. So that's kind of, well, it's a normal thing. I think it's true for any new project. But overall, of course, we are still in the early stage. However, I think we are really making a good progress, not only practically, but also in terms of getting the idea. For example, 20 years ago, when it was still just starting, there was really few people who took this idea seriously and who was even considering rewilding as a kind of important or reasonable thing. And now there is more and more people are aware of rewilding ideas. The more and more people know about climate change, more people know about the Pleistocene Park. And for example, even you said that you feel that you're talking with celebrity. Let's say, no one, let's say 20 years, that wouldn't be a case.
Right.
So in this sense, I think we do make a progress. And I think we will get there eventually. Because, let's say we are not inventing a bike. We are building a bike. We know that the bike existed. So we know that those high productive grazing ecosystems existed in the past, and they existed for millions of years on the enormous territories. And we know that they have many animals. We know that they have lots of carbon in the soil, so they sequester carbon. We know that they keep permafrost cold. So all these things we know. We just don't maybe know yet exactly how this bike look like. But we know some ideas about it, and we are discovering the ways how to make this bike. And so in this sense, I think sooner or later, I hope we will succeed.
I like the bike metaphor. It's sort of like, you sort of know what it's, the general shape and what it's supposed to accomplish, but you're still trying to figure out the different parts to put together. I think my feeling about the park, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would consider it a success to say that it provides a model. Like, it doesn't feel to me like Pleistocene Park by itself is going to be able to solve the climate crisis, but what it could do is provide a model that other people could use and that we could scale up potentially. So would you say that it's a success yet in that sense? Like, has it proven enough effectiveness that the idea could be spread and scaled up?
I think yes. We, of course, Pleistocene Park, even if we will scale it up to what the territory which we have, it still will be tiny piece of land on the globe. And we definitely will need to expand and probably start many other parks, and eventually hope that these ecosystems will establish and will grow on their own and merge together finally. And after that, we'll have quite a good tool to mitigate climate change. And I also wouldn't say that these ecosystems on their own will be able to solve the climate change problem. That will be kind of overstatement from my side. And I think that it's kind of important to have these ecosystems coming, but must be applied other activities. So it should be nature-based solutions. It should be reduction in our carbon footprint. So all those things must take place. And climate change, it's a very serious problem. And, it took us 3 centuries to get us that far into the climate change problem. So it's quite naive to think that, I don't know, for example, Elon Musk will give, $50 million and some crazy guy will find a solution. No, he will not. It's just theoretically, I think, physically not possible. So it will take lots of money, lots of time, and lots of human efforts to really solve the climate change problem. And it will probably take lots of time. But, knowing the complexity of the problem, we must take kind of any action possible. Also, in terms of the Pleistocene Park, media always talk about the preservation of permafrost, and that's kind of the main feature why. I actually don't know why everybody likes this idea. I think mostly because people understand it. So it's kind of more, kind of more logical, and all journalists they write about things they understand, and that's kind of the part people understand. So the horses trampling down the snow and cooling permafrost seems like an easy and logical concept. However, it's actually the hardest of all the climate mitigation options park provides. We have 4 main features which we mention usually when we say about how park is helping to solve climate change. So first is albedo effect. So grasslands are lighter than forest, and they reflect high portion of energy back to space. So it's nothing to do with the greenhouse gases, it's just direct cooling. For example, in the summer, it's the shades of green. So light green, dark green. So there is noticeable difference, but it's not dramatic. But for example, in April/May, in the Arctic, everything's still covered with snow, but we already have a polar day. So we have sun high and very bright, and it provides lots of energy. And all the forests, so in the Arctic is mostly, at least in Siberia, it's a large forest. large trees have all their needles falling every autumn, and the stems are super dark, and they're heated by the sun enormously. And we have, I think, something like 160 watts per square meter reflected for several weeks, additionally from the pastures, because they are white, because they covered with snow. And that's 160 watts per square meter. It's, for comparison, it's like put a heater, big oil heater in every room. Imagine every room you live, like you add extra heater. So that's quite a lot of energy. Second effect, it's, yes, we talk about permafrost and preservation of permafrost and how animals can help to trample down the snow and by that get 2 to 3 degrees cooling. Third effect is actually, and the one which I personally kind of like the most, and I think it have the most, let's say, long-term and good effect, that right now in the Arctic, all the vegetation is low productive. If it's low productive, it means it does not actively photosynthesize. If it does not actively photosynthesize, it does not evaporate water. It does not use much water. If it does not use much water, it does not need deep roots. And all the vegetation which we have now in the Arctic either has no roots, like moss and lichen, or, for example, the large trees have all the roots only by the surface. So there is no deep roots in any vegetation in the modern Arctic ecosystems. And we are replacing that by grass and herbs, which grow very rapidly. They need lots of water for growing, and they are growing a deep root system, which is going all the way down to permafrost. And in our soils, they are frozen most of the year. So in the winter, all soil profile is frozen, and in the summer, it's still very cold. And decomposition is very, very, very slow in these soils. And if you have some carbon input, so what's carbon? So there was CO2 in the atmosphere, was picked up by photosynthesis, converted into organic matter, and as a root was buried in the form of root, was buried in the ground. Then it will start partially decompose and creating these rich soils. And the colder your soil, the more carbon you can store in the soil. And that's kind of the main important feature that, you know, when people start talking about nature-based solutions, I think pretty much 90% of the planet, of the people, maybe 95 or even 99, as a main solution will say that we need to plant trees.
Yeah.
And some moist and warm climates, like in tropics or in somewhere in California, where there is huge sequoias which grow very rapidly, and it make much sense. But for example, if you go to the Arctic, where our trees are sparse, tiny, and they take them centuries to grow, it doesn't make much sense. So there is, in above ground vegetation in my region, there is like 2 kilograms of carbon per square meter. It's maximum what you can get in the forest. Same time, in the soils, you can get up to 100 kilograms of carbon. So 50 times more.
Wow.
So it's even apart from permafrost, rich permafrost is not that big territories. There is huge storages, but there is lots of places in the Arctic where there isn't that much carbon in the permafrost. And still, if you create an ecosystem which will create rich soils, these ecosystems will sequester carbon. And the limits are quite high, so you can get, for decades and centuries, you can sequester carbon by these ecosystems. And fourth effect, it's methane. As I said, productive vegetation use lots of water and it evaporates lots of water. Arctic, at least in our region, is actually quite dry. We get only like 200 millimeters precipitation, maybe 300 millimeters precipitation. It's, I think, several times less than what you get in your region. And grasses are really drying out the surfaces and soils, and there is much less wetlands, and lakes are forming and exist in the ecosystem with high productive vegetation. And for example, I know that over the last 20 years in the Pleistocene Park, the main probably difference which I see, that when I just came to the Pleistocene Park after university, I could not walk in the Pleistocene Park anywhere without rubber boots in the summer. It was all super moist. And now I'm wearing sneakers all the time there.
So because the grass is absorbed, all is starting to
and overall the ground gets much drier. That's kind of visible effect. And where it's everything's moist and water saturated, all organic matter is getting decomposed into the methane. And methane is much stronger greenhouse gas. So if you dry out soils, if you don't have wetlands, if you have less lakes, you have much less methane emissions. And methane is a very strong greenhouse gas, and you want to avoid emitting methane as much as possible. If you have 1 kilogram of carbon, it's so much better to decompose it into the CO2 rather than methane.
Right.
So in this sense, these grazing ecosystems are much better. There is case of ruminants, so animals, cows, bulls, they do produce methane, but still I think that's around 25% of the methane which would be otherwise emitted from the water saturated at the same territory.
That is fascinating. I did not, you're right. All of the research that I read, actually, I did read a little bit about the carbon sequestration, but it was not explained as well as you did with the root systems and really getting into the moisture content and how that impacts everything. I did not know about the albedo thing, and I did not know about the idea that decomposition in a moist environment creating methane. So thank you for going through that in such detail with me. That's really fascinating.
Yes. So now getting back to the kind of problem with permafrost. So right now, the status of Pleistocene Park is that we have some territory, it's fenced, and we're introducing animals and adapting herbivores, and herbivores are starting to roam and slowly convert the vegetation from one type to another. So the more they graze, the better grasses get. The grasses are getting competitive advantage against other plants when there are animals present. So they are kind of grasses, they don't have any defending strategies against other plants. And mosses and trees will take over if there is no herbivores. And for that, grasses, they're feeding herbivores, and herbivores for that kind of fighting against other vegetation for them. So all the ecosystems are in competition in the war against each other. And for grasses, they are kind of the most developed because they are hiring soldiers, like kind of this foreign legion for them. And those animals are kind of their warriors, and it's their army. And in this sense, if you have this army, then slowly grasses are winning the war. And that's what pretty much happening now in the park. And at the same time, when we say that, we already see that we have drier territory, we have less methane, and we can measure that. And there was some measurements showing that we have much less methane in the park. So this effect is already taking place. Secondly, if we talk about albedo, if you get rid of trees, if your vegetation is you have more grasses, you see the change in albedo. We can also measure that, and we see that effect. If we talk about carbon sequestration, so the more grasses are growing, the more roots is building up, and we do have a detailed map of how much carbon we have in the park. We did it in 2018, and we see that it's like at least around 4 kilograms more than in surrounding areas. So we see the increase already, and we'll have more detailed map coming next year, and already see the change in action, how much carbon content has changed over the 4 years. So that's something we can measure already right now. So those three effects are working. And awesome. With permafrost, it's much more complicated. First of all, if you have animals, if you want to get rid of snow, for animals to dig through the snow, they need really good pastures. So it should be enough forage for them underneath the snow for them to start digging the snow. So that's kind of the first effect. We don't have that much good pastures yet. So we are forming the pastures, but really few territories which are really high quality. And secondly, right now we don't have complete ecosystem yet. So we have herbivores and we have change in vegetation, but that's not complete ecosystem. And as I said, complete ecosystem will be when we'll have predators. And predators' main goal is that they are shepherding herbivores, and they're changing the grazing behavior. Because, for example, right now, we don't have any predators in the Pleistocene Park. And my animals, they're lazy, they don't want to move. Well, it's natural. All of us are lazy. Right. And they will, all summer long, will hang out on the best pastures. They will kind of overgraze it. They will eat everything to the ground. And other pastures, they will not go and use them. Why? We have the best ones here. And as a result, for example, there is, I have good pastures, but all the grass on it are eaten in the summer. And in the winter, animals will not go there and they will not trample the snow. And what predators do? Predators immediately make sure that herbivores are not hanging out in one place in kind of one huge herd and without movement. So animals start to separate. So they evenly kind of spread around the territory. they don't overgraze in one place. They migrate much more. So their strategy is not only to eat, but also to avoid predators. So in this sense, if in your ecosystem there are predators, you do not have overgrazing. So that's pretty much not possible. And that's something we need animals for. And, when animals move, that means that they use pastures a little bit in the summer and also in the winter. So animals move much more, they trample snow much more, and they use evenly all pastures, and they trample the snow evenly on all pastures. So for this preservation of permafrost, we need to create ecosystem. We need to have good grasses, and we need to have predators. And only after that, this permafrost effect will take place. And that's something that makes it actually quite complex and urgent, because permafrost is getting warmer at a huge pace.
Right.
So Arctic is getting warmer, and permafrost is warming up, and we don't have too many years before.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about the urgency, but before that, I just wanted to say how much I love the picture that you painted there, because it really illustrates in very specifically the answer to the question I asked earlier about why diversity is important. And I could really see that start to come into focus when you talk about the grass needing the herbivores to survive and to thrive. The herbivores need the grass to eat, but then both of them also need the predators, otherwise they'll overgraze. And so you start seeing these the interconnectedness of everything, because I just think there's a bias, certainly amongst non-environmental scientists, that just everything is just sort of like a separate little entity, right? There's grass, and then there's animals, and then there's this other thing, right? But really the web is, and the interactions seem to be actually where all of the action is at. And we just don't think about that enough, I think. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed that sort of painting that picture for me.
For many animals, you need your house, you need a place for you to live. So same with animals. For animals, their ecosystem is their home. And for some of these creatures, getting kicked out of the ecosystem or being left without the ecosystem means death. So some animals can, move to forest and hide from people there, like deers. They hide. It's not that animals like to live in the forest. Like people think that wild animals live in the forest, and that's very false statement. They're hiding in the forest because their home ecosystems were taken from them, because all the best pastures are now farmlands and urban territories.
Interesting.
And that's why animals are hiding in the forest, because humans don't get much profit from the forest, really. We are not feeding off the forest. For the forest, we use maximum as a lumber for creation of the house. That's the only profit we really get from the forest. And that's why there is little people in the forest. And that's why animals can survive and hide in the forest. In some regions, for example, in the temperate climate, even in the forest, deers or moose can find them enough food. But for example, in our local forest, in the large forest, we don't have any animals.
Really?
In the park, I have this large fenced area. And let's say 20% of this fenced area, it's a large forest. And it's literally impossible to force my animals to walk into this forest. No.
You're right. That is counterintuitive. You normally think of the forest as where the animals are. You're right. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's I think the main challenge of the Pleistocene Park. It's not even about getting animals or adapting them, and that's all practical things. For us, if you want to create a world's largest ecosystem, we need to convince people that what we are doing is important, that we want people to understand how the wild ecosystem really look like, how productive can they be. Because, what you see, for example, in the National Geographic channel or BBC about this Serengeti, so national parks in Africa, and think, oh, that's something extreme. No, that's not extreme. That was everywhere on the planet was like that. And we need people to understand that. And as long as people think that, if everybody thinks that forest is like a treasure sacred ecosystem, we will not succeed. And in our vision, forest, it's invasive ecosystems which appeared only after humans got rid of the grazing ecosystems. So that's just 15,000 years ago, there was 10 times less forest than right now. So the forest were only small patches away in the tropics.
That was a big reason why I wanted to do the show on Pleistocene Park, was because it challenged so many, learning about it challenged so many biases that I had, and I wanted to share that information with people, because I too, and I'm relatively science literate myself. At least I like to think I am. I don't know, maybe I'm an idiot, but anyway, I think I'm science literate, and I still had those biases you're talking about, where I still considered, if you had asked me months ago before I was doing this research, I would have said, oh yeah, forests, that's the ultimate goal, is that's the king of nature, is the forest, right? I had that same bias, and I didn't understand the importance of the symbiotic relationship between animals and the grasslands that they're on, and all of the carbon cycle. And so it's just part of what I really love about what you're doing, is that there's some really counterintuitive things that it's actually really important for people to understand. And that's part of what I think of as like the magic of Pleistocene Park to me.
Well, if you think about the word herbivore, what does herbivore means? It's something that eats herbs. So it's not something who eats trees. And in this sense, also, science, I'm a scientist myself, and I grew up on the research station. I saw many scientists growing up, and in my kind of professional career, I collaborate with and to work with many scientists. And I can say that science is actually, and many scientists are even more religious people than people who go to church every morning. So it's just the difference that scientists, they don't believe in God. They usually believe, for them, their God is their scientific theory. And if someone has a scientific theory, it's for them it's a sacred thing, and he will not change his perception of vision. It's pretty much impossible to convince any scientist that his theory or some theory he believes in is wrong. So the only way is to change kind of for one theory to win another theory, is to talk not to scientists. You have to talk to people who don't have these strong ideas or suggestions about the topic. If they're kind of open-minded, and if they haven't thought much about that and they don't care, and then you come with the logic, and if you provide them the good rationale, and they think that it's logical and they like it, then they can accept the ideas. The people who already have the strong feelings, and the scientists who spend years in, for example, in conservation, they would never kind of like the idea of the park.
Do you get a lot of pushback from conservationists? Do you get a lot of pushback from other scientists that don't accept these findings of yours?
I live in the remote Arctic research station in the far northeast of Siberia. I'm so far away from all the people that it's I don't really get much. We are too far to get much retaliation. Maybe if we would be somewhere, I don't know, in the central capitals in Moscow or in New York, and we would be struggling for the governmental funding, then I think we would be kind of suffering. And since Pleistocene Park is mostly self-funded project or used on private donations of people who like the park, and we are not taking the money away from any other projects. Even if so, we might think that some projects are kind of not important or useless or even wrong. We are just kind of, it's not our field. I'm not teaching others. I'm just saying that, okay, here we do this and that. And since we do it on our personal resources mostly, then there is not that much negotiations we see. Because I think probably many people don't like what we do, but they are either too polite or too afraid, or don't care enough to say it in my face.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that because of some of these biases, maybe there might be more prone to people being afraid of something different, right? Because it does feel somewhat different, right? And so I could see that. I could see people being more, even scientists, like you say, sometimes scientists can themselves be very dogmatic. So it makes sense that sometimes there would be some trepidation there. But
overall, I think I would say that we get still, even accounts for everything I just said, I think we do get very little negative reactions because
good.
Kind of from scientific point of view, there is not that much you can object to us, because there is not that much knowledge about the problem, and there is overall what we're doing. We are, I would say, restoring something that used to be. And those ecosystems we reach, and people don't really argue about that. And I think the main actually concern and the main negative reactions people say and express is actually about feasibility of the project.
Right.
So as a kind of side note, we had a couple movie makers working in the park in the last 7 years. So there is one guy from United States, Luke Griswold. He's making a movie, and I think he's just finishing his movie. He was filming it for 7 years. And he wanted to make a story about the park kind of top notch. And for that, of course, not like news media who want to come, just take a picture of horses, write a short report, explain. Right. Instead, they wanted to make us a kind of high quality documentary, and they needed controversy, they needed kind of some actions, and they were seeking for real, valid, negative opinions about the park. They wanted to interview people who think badly about the park and whose rational explanations would make sense. And they both struggled with that. So when they said that kind of the many people may say, oh, we don't like Zimov, we don't like what they're doing, but it will be just kind of a general statement, right, without much justification. And the main justification comes here with that we might be too late, or it's too hard of a task. So, and that's kind of, maybe those statements do have kind of ground.
I gotta ask. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. When do I get to see a woolly mammoth, or is that something that's still on the table?
I think in the last month I was answering this question like 50 times already to different media.
I'm so sorry to ask you again.
Yeah. Yes. Well, no, that's all right. So yes, I think I know as much as you know, or any person who reads news knows, that like 3 weeks ago or something like that, George Kirsch, who is the head of genetics lab in Harvard, and some venture capitalist Ben Lam, they created a company named Colossal, which is stating that they will get the mammoths in 6 years. So that's the official statement. And I know George Kirsch personally, and he been on the Pleistocene Park, and I was in Harvard giving a talk in their lab. And according to his official statements, when he said several years ago, and I think they keep into the word, they say that the first mammoths will go to the Pleistocene Park. So in this sense, I, of course, really hope those guys will succeed. Do I believe, as a person who is trying to make something new and facing all the troubles, and I don't believe that creating a woolly elephant, what they're proposing to make, will still be possible in 6 years. I will be happy if I'm wrong. So with their efforts, it's kind of lots of complicated problems that they will have to solve to create a mammoth, because it's scientifically many challenges. It's much more complicated than cloning a sheep. And that's it's a scientific project. It's not only about mammoths, it's about pushing the science forward. So in this sense. In terms of how much I right now care about mammoths, I do think that mammoths will be beneficial for the ecosystem. As you said, biodiversity, with mammoths, grazing ecosystems get much more aggressive. So the mammoths can actually walk into the forest. So they can walk the grasslands into the forest. Also, we don't know exactly how the grazing ecosystem functions yet. Our understanding of how the ecosystem functions in general is not that great. But what we know that historically, in every high productive grazing ecosystem, there is an elephant. It's say the African elephant in Serengeti, or there was several types of extinct elephants here in your place in North America. We had mammoths, there is Asian elephant. So if there is a grazing ecosystem, there must be an elephant. There is a niche for an elephant. And we want to fill up all the niches. And in this sense, I would really love to have mammoth. But in terms of the time, even if they will succeed in 6 years, mammoths, they grow for a long time. I didn't want to have infant baby mamas. First infant baby mamas coming to the Pleistocene Park. I didn't want to have that.
Right.
I would need at least several species, and they would have to be at least teenagers. So let's say, realistically, I don't see any mamas coming to the park in the next 20 years.
And is that because you want them to be big enough to fill that niche of like knocking down trees? Is that why?
No, I don't want them to die in the first winter.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes that makes sense.
They need to be already grown up and strong enough to resist the Arctic.
Right.
And in this sense, it's quite critical. We want them to be. Of course, maybe they can be, if they will be huge money channeling, we may have this mammoth facility built in our place and have mammoths living inside and under this controlled temperature and moisture regime, etc., etc. But that's the scientific. It's not about mammoths playing a role in the ecosystems. It's about experiment how to create a new creature and adapt it to a new place. So it's not about climate change. It's not about environment. Apart from that, overall, I think that George Church, he's really a brilliant scientist and he's very smart. And I think if someone can create a mammoth, it's this guy. I am overall supportive of what they're doing. And I'm actually very sad how much negative reactions this idea received. So there was, millions of media about this topic. And every journal, every big journal and TV channel of the world probably wrote about it. There is always lots of negative reactions. And one, for example, of the big reactions, negative saying, there's $15 million will spent, will be wasted, and they should be rather used on conservation. And if this money, those $50 million, which is actually very tiny money for the scientific company in the United States, $15 million is like nothing. It's really, really small money. And if those money would be taken away from conservationists, this would be a valid statement. But those money, I think they were coming from the Bitcoin market. And there was trillions of dollars printed in the United States in the recent years. Majority of them went to this stock markets and to the Bitcoin market. And Bitcoin market, Bitcoin is like the worst thing possible. It's nothing which is consuming energy and accelerated climate change. And it's consuming millions and billions, trillions of dollars probably going to the Bitcoin market. And if there was this tiny bit of 15 millions taken out of that and put into the research, into genetics works, which is, genetics, it's the first frontier of science right now. And it's anyway great thing. If there would be, take another, 100 millions and put to conservation, why not?
Yeah.
It would also be great, but come on.
Yeah, I think that's a fallacy that I hear a lot when somebody just wants to try to justify their opposition to something. I hear that fallacy about we could be spending all this money on X, right, on some other thing, but that's not actually how it works, right? Like you said, the money didn't come from another conservation project. It came from Bitcoin capitalization. So that's not really a valid argument. Do you hear the playing God argument sometimes too? Is that something that you hear?
I personally know. Come on, I am trying to, for example, with mammoths, George Church does get that a lot, and they do get a lot of negative reactions on the mammoths. And I am trying to find a narrow path between getting as much hype from mammoths as possible. So, I have this mammoth in our brand. It's called the Mammoth Step, and people like the mammoths. And thanks to this cartoon, this Ice Age cartoon,
right?
All people visualize mammoths a lot, and from using up this mammoth brand, we, I think, benefit.
Yeah,
with the Pleistocene Park, definitely. But at the same time, I am trying to receive as little negative reactions about this cloning the mammoths. And as soon as someone will start saying bad things about me, I immediately say, come on, I'm just bringing up horses to where they used to live and making sure they adapt to this new place. And I'm doing bison and horses. So just leave me aside. I'm not playing God.
Right.
So, I think overall, so far, I managed quite good doing that. So benefiting from mammoths and not getting negative reactions too.
That's good. That's a good way to have your cake and eat it too there. I'm certainly rooting for the mammoth. It does sound like there are still several challenges to overcome before before we see mammoths even living in the wild, much less, herds of them. But I really look forward to that day, and I just hope I get to see it before I go extinct. So I'm rooting for it.
Yeah, there is, I think the main challenge there is this artificial wool. And that's a challenge which actually have nothing to do with mammoths, really. So that's a scientific challenge which many geneticists was trying to solve for many years now. And there's many groups working on this project. And if they will succeed with that, that will be a really big scientific breakthrough. Maybe, some people, religious people, may not like it or may think it's a bad thing, but that's already kind of different topic. That's not a topic about mammoths. It's a topic about developing science and making this kind of our natural way how we kind of live and reproduce already kind of unnatural.
Right.
So, but that's a different story.
If you don't mind, I want to ask you a little bit more of a personal question, just because Kayla and I felt that one of the most interesting aspects of the story of Pleistocene Park is your journey, your personal journey. So can you talk a little bit about sort of like what your childhood was like, what drew you away, but then what motivated you to come back to the park?
Well, I don't think my story is that interesting, but anyway, so I grew up in scientific family. My father, S3E16, Zimov, he was the founder of this Northeast Scientific Station back in 1980. So it was founded 3 years before I was born. So I was pretty much born on the station. Well, I was conceived on the station. I was born in Vladivostok. And I came with my mom to the Arctic when I was 2, so in 1985. And since that time, I was growing up on the research station. And then when I was 5, my dad started first experiments with Pleistocene Park. It wasn't Pleistocene Park yet, but he published a research paper in one of the big Russian Academy of Sciences journals, stating that animals can really change the productivity and the function of the ecosystems in the Arctic. And there wasn't much talk about climate change at that time. Everyone was expecting the ice age to come shortly. But with this paper, he came to some local administration, and a couple of weeks later, they already have few horses around the base camp of the research station. So there was first experiment started when I was 5. Then in 1990, 1991, Soviet Union collapsed. Their funding for the research station was over. My dad had to give away all the horses. And then for over the 90s, it was pretty much tough time when I was a teenager and growing up in the kind of collapse in Soviet Union, the remote research station in the Arctic. And we didn't have much funding we didn't get any funding from the government. We got only some random grants from international scientific communities, and that was very little. And at that time, my dad, in 1996, officially started the Pleistocene Park. So it was a tough time. And I think to start the park and to get kind of a research station through these tough years, my dad even sold his apartments in Vladivostok. So he had apartments in Vladivostok. And at that time, 90s, for all the people in the Arctic, at least in the town of Chersky, where I grew up, and I think for most people in the post-Soviet Arctic, that for them, the dream was to sell everything they have in the Arctic and buy apartments in the mainland and move to the mainland. And my dad did the opposite. So he sold the apartment in the mainland for the opportunity to stay in the Arctic. And that was quite a big risk he took. And then in 1998, I was, I think, 9th grade out of 11. And I went to some competition in math and chemistry, and I got 4th place in our state of Yakutia in chemistry. And I was invited to Yakutsk, and in Yakutsk, in some other kind of this chemistry quiz, there were some people from Novosibirsk, and they were professors who were interviewing kids to be for the invitation to this fancy physical mathematical school. So Novosibirsk, it's the 3rd biggest city in Russia. It's the biggest in Siberia, and it's famous for its, there is Akademgorodok, so-called. It's a town just outside of the city where it's a big campus with 30 research institutes and a big and quite prestigious university. And I was invited to the high school there. And so in 1998, when I was still 14, I left the research station and moved to Novosibirsk. And I was there for 2 years in high school and 4 more years in the university. When I was in the university, as I already said, in the first year, my dad came back, visited me in Novosibirsk and asked if I have any plans for the future living, and I didn't have any. So I was in the mathematical department, and actually, honestly saying, didn't really like it in the mathematical department. And it was just a series of consequences which led me to this department. And majority of my friends planned to become programmers, and I didn't have a desire to become a programmer. And when my dad invited me back to the Arctic, I was actually happily accepting the invitation because I didn't have any other options, and the Arctic seemed to be a nice place. I grew up in the Arctic. It's my home place, and I love it. And also, I felt that, research station and the park do have some potential for development.
Right. So he didn't have to convince you very much?
He say, if you would say him this question, he would say that it was a great challenge for him to do that. It was it took lots of thinking and so on and so forth. But no, I was actually happily accepting this invitation. So, and then over the next 3 years, I just didn't change my mind. And finally, after I finished the university, I came back to the research station. So no, that was, I think, less cinematic as some journalists would want to portray that.
There's still a lot of cinematicness to it, Scott. Actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you then was what is it like to go back to a project that your father worked on, is at that point was over 20 years old, and also is potentially has so much impact on not just science, but on policy, environmental policy? It's just such a bit, did that ever weigh heavily on you?
Well, first of all, let's say Pleistocene Park is much more of a theory, at least back at the time when I showed up. Pleistocene Park was much more a theory rather than a successful experiment. So officially, park was founded in 1986, and I came back in 2004. And over that time, it was always funded only from the resource of my family, and our family is the only profits my family is making is doing fundamental science in the high Siberian Arctic. There is no one is making money doing fundamental science, and no one is making money in the high Arctic. This in our region, people don't even mine gold because it's in our town.
Scientific gold. It's scientific gold, though, right? That's what I mean. Is it's so important? Does that make you feel pressured at all? The importance of it all?
Pressure, no. It's rather giving you satisfaction that you're doing something meaningful, because it's a complicated work. There is lots of risks, and it's life risks even. So living and running a research station in the Arctic and doing the things that we do is there was many cases when I realized that it could be dead, and many cases when I think I didn't realize that it could be dead, but I really could. And that's overall kind of all complicated, and it's a tough living, and it's not that much enjoyment you get very often from what you're doing. It's cold, wet, or mosquitoes, or and very tiring. But if you understand, kind of comparing what you're doing with what many people do, sitting in the office working for a boss, or working in a factory, or driving a truck, and kind of spending your life doing all that, I clearly think that I do get much more satisfaction from what I'm doing.
That's great. It sounds really fulfilling, and it's really good to hear that you feel more fulfilled and more satisfied than you do feel pressure. So that's one of the things I was talking about with Kayla, is that it felt we both we talked about you a little bit on the show, on the podcast, and we said, man, that must have been such a tough decision for him to make, but it sounds like it was the right decision.
Yes, it's maybe first years when I came back to the station, I was working for my dad. I wasn't that satisfied because pretty much I was also working for a boss. But over the years, I got more and more kind of skills at managing these projects, not only the park, but also other scientific projects. And when it became my job and my responsibilities, I started to get much more enjoyment and satisfaction from what I'm doing. And I think now I'm very much settled with my job and how we are developing the park and my role in all of that. So I don't have any, big emotion thinking, oh, maybe I should have doing something else. No, I'm feel perfectly fine doing what I'm doing right now.
That's great. And I mean, I certainly appreciate, I think probably our listeners appreciate, a lot of people appreciate the work that you're doing. I know, to me, when I learn about people like you that are doing work to, enrich our understanding, and especially about a subject that is so critical to our continued health and survival as a species, it brings me a little more hope. I don't know if it's the same in Russia right now, but certainly in the US, there's a lot of anxiety around climate. People are feeling very anxious about the climate crisis, the situation. And I know that learning about Pleistocene Park and learning about your work, it helped lift some burden. It gave me a little bit of hope that there are people out there that are working on this problem, that are people out there that are doing this science. So I guess I just want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Also, as a side note, yes, there is actually a huge increase in awareness about climate change in Russia in the recent couple of years. So let's say 5-10 years ago, in Russia, no one cared about climate change. It was everyone cared economical crisis, so some political situations that some people cared about, and climate change, that wasn't a kind of a big topic at all. And now there is everybody, so president, government, business, all media is starting to talk about climate change too. So it's and that's actually something that makes me happy too, because it's, if you don't talk about the problem, if you don't think about the problem, there is no way you can solve the problem. And in the past, 5 or 10 years ago, there was no media in Russia about Pleistocene Park. So all the media was coming from, and all the interest was coming from abroad. And now we do get lots of press attention within the Russian media, and that's kind of it's nice.
I was going to ask you, as my next question is, are we too late, or is this model that you guys have discovered, is that something that actually could really help us and make a dent, or is it all too late?
Well, first of all, as a first thing that I told you during this chat is that we see Pleistocene Park as a sort of a development in learning how to live sustainably on the planet. So it's not only about climate change. And in this sense, even if the climate change, if the global warming will happen, if it will increase the temperatures by 5 degrees, and let's say there will be huge problems, wars, starvations, migrations, all that will happen, still those ecosystems will eventually help us live on this planet and make kind of soften the consequences of the climate change anyhow. So that will happen. Secondly, I don't know if we are late or not. I don't know how the climate change will be happening in the next several decades. We don't know if the permafrost will start thawing or not. Maybe, there's many scientists who are actually warming up that we are entering new ice age. And that's kind of, it doesn't have to do something with greenhouse gases, it's have to do with, ocean circulations. And there's this North Atlantic circulations are slowing down, and there is going to be less heat transported to the Europe, for example. So there is many unknowns, and we cannot say, there is nobody who can definitely say that you say, no, we have 30 years left. If we have 20 or 30 years left, maybe it's too late, but we don't know how rapidly we will be able to develop the park. And so in this sense, I see that there is a problem, that permafrost is changing, that we need to mitigate climate change, and I know the solution. I know that restoring the ecosystem will help. And all I can do is that, that's a problem, that's a solution. And I'm trying to create the solution. So I'm just putting all my efforts to create this ecosystem and to develop Pleistocene Park. I clearly probably cannot do it better and faster than I do it right now.
Right.
So
right.
I'm, let's say, using up all my resources and abilities. And after, for example, this year, we did lots of progress in terms of park, in terms of bringing new animals and building the fence and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it will probably take me another year to pay all the debts for everything that we've done this year. So I really cannot do it better than I do it right now. And so in this sense, if there is a path you need to walk, you cannot finish unless you start walking. There is a little fairy tale, which I like to say, to answer so this fairy tale, which I want to say as a kind of answer to a question, if we are too late or not. So there is a jar with milk, and 3 mice fell into this jar of milk. And the first one was starving for so many years and see all this milk, and she's like, oh, great, the milk. And she starts drinking the milk, and drinks until she actually chokes and drowns. And the second one was much smarter, and she saw that the walls of the jar are tall and there is no way to get out, and this milk is not a kind of a gift. It's not a fortune. It's actually a trap, and there is no way to get out. And she's like, well, I don't want to prolong my suffers. And she just dives to never get out. And the third one, she also saw the threat, but I don't know, she was too stupid or too optimistic or too stubborn. And she was just, it's milk and there's no way to get out. I'm going to still keep trying. And she was swimming in this milk and trying to jump on the walls and swam and jumped until she finally mixed this milk into a butter. And through butter, she got out. So I really hope that I'm this third mouse in terms of the Pleistocene Park and in terms of climate change. So I have no idea if my efforts will be enough. I have no ideas if we'll deliver solution to the climate change in time. But those uncertainties are clearly not the reason for me not to try doing.
Well then, we never really know how to transition away from interviews.
I have a perfect transition.
Especially interviews that long and that good.
Do you want me to give you the transition?
Please do.
Wow, Chris. That was a mammoth of an interview.
Oh my God.
Told you I knew how.
Okay. I quit.
That's it? That's finally the thing?
Well, I think maybe a good thing to talk about first is sort of the thing that we have been circling around for the past few episodes and definitely came up in a pretty big way here. And it's sort of what the interview ended on, which is talking about that idea of taking action. That's what that fairy tale, that parable that he told was all about, right? Like the 3 mice parable. You know, the first mouse was like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to just drink all the milk. That kind of feels like that's the climate change denial sort of thing, where it's like, this is awesome.
Unfettered capitalists.
That's the dirty
suckling
polluters.
At the teat of our world.
And then the second mouse kind of feels like the, climate hopelessness, like, well,
Right.
I'm going to drown anyway.
Right.
And then the third mouse is like, okay, I'm just going to do something. And I don't know, like, certainly, I think part of what's so instructive about that metaphor is that it's not just that the third mouse does something, it's that in so doing, they discover a different exit because they
Right.
can't predict the future.
Right.
They couldn't predict the future that, like, oh, if I swim around fast enough, I'll make butter.
Right.
They just said, I'm going to try, and then the solution presented itself.
Right.
And I think that is just such a really, it's because the reason he told it was to answer the question, like, are we too late?
Right.
And he's right. Like, we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
Like, we think we know, and
We have
especially...
predictions, we have best guesses, we have
Right.
scientific projections.
Right, exactly. And so, like, to say too late, and also, like, there's not really ever going to be a binary of, like, yesterday it was awesome
Right.
and tomorrow it just is, everything's disastrous and burning.
Right. It's not suddenly it's going to be too hot to live in Los Angeles. It's going to be, this summer it's this much, and this summer it's
Right,
this much, and this summer
exactly.
it's this much. And now people aren't buying houses here. Now people are having to move. It's like it's going to be gradual.
Right, and we've already seen some leading edges stuff of that, and frankly, as privileged, rich Americans, we have probably not noticed a lot of the leading edges of those things that have
Correct.
happened to poorer people around the world, poorer countries that that are closer to coasts or
Right.
more susceptible to desertification.
The countries that are contributing to climate change the least are the ones that are being affected by it
The
first
most.
and the most.
Right. So, if we were to sit here and say, like, well, I don't know when it's too late, like, those folks have a different answer than
Right.
we would. We were like, oh, I don't know, it's coming, isn't it? And those people would be saying,
It's here.
It's
It was
here,
here.
it's been here, like, we're pretty screwed. Thanks for noticing. So yeah, it's a gradual process. Like, we're starting to notice it in the West now, especially in California with all the fires we've been having. We always have fires, but they are increasing in frequency and magnitude.
Right.
Same thing with hurricanes out east. So
I mean, there was flooding in Germany. There was flooding in New York. There's
Yeah.
like weird weather is happening all around us, which indicates that, the climate has changed.
yeah, so the point is not that, like, we're there. The point is, like, is now the too late? Was before the too late? Is tomorrow the too late? Or is there just no such thing as too late and it's a sliding scale and we should just not worry about, not have the, like, anxiety, the existential anxiety, and instead just churn our butter?
Right. The benefit of expending so much energy to pinpoint the too late probably is outweighed by anything.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, like, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but, like, I talked to my therapist about my climate anxiety, and it's like, apparently, according to all the, pundits out there, it's a very popular thing
Right.
for people to talk to their therapists about these days. And it sounds like, according to Mr. Zimov, it's gaining a lot of attention in Russia as
Right.
well. Anyway, I guess that's all that is to say is, like, I loved his answer so much, and that's why I did the Pleistocene Park episode.
Right.
I wouldn't have done an episode if it was just about, like, here's some shitty climate stuff.
Right.
I did the episode because I wanted to highlight a person that was churning butter. I wanted to
Right.
highlight someone who was solution oriented and have that be, like, a beacon for hope, but also, like, a model for behavior for the
Right.
rest of us. And I hope I can take it to heart, and I hope it helps. I don't know. I hope it helps our listeners to hear these stories too.
You know who else was a mouse that churned butter?
Mickey, give a mouse a cookie mouse.
Prolific con artist Frank Abagnale, as portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in the classic Steven Spielberg film Catch Me If You Can, where
What are you talking about?
Tom Hanks and Leo DiCaprio
I've
went
seen
toe
that
to toe.
movie.
Yeah.
That was Leo DiCaprio was like the con man, and then
Yeah. And his father was portrayed by Christopher Walken, and several times in the movie, he had a little story to tell his son. 2 mice, Frank, fell in a bucket of cream.
Okay, thank you for doing the Christopher Walken impression.
Yeah.
I don't understand what it has to do with con artistry.
I'm just saying that's the first. Because one mouse was like, and the other mouse fucking bootstraps.
So he was saying that con artistry is like bootstrapsing?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That feels a little shoehorn. I don't know.
I also think the actual guy was maybe less of a prolific con artist than the film portrayed him to be, but
Oh.
I can't, who's to say?
Well, that's-
I just wanted to throw a little Easter egg in there, because as soon as he started telling that story, I was like, I've heard a version of this
How
story.
did you
It's
remember
less
that?
good, because that movie came out when I was in high school, And there was a couple friends and I who, for some reason, really keyed on the way Christopher Walken said, 2 mice, Frank fell in a bucket of cream, and told that story, and we would always just quote it at each other.
Oh, okay.
As Christopher
so
Walken.
you were weirdos in high school, and that's why you remember
we were theater
it. That
kids.
makes sense. Oh, okay. That explains it. Anyway, back to Pleistocene Park and Nikita Zimov. He also talked about this sort of more towards the beginning of the interview about how the point of the park, because I asked him, like, what's the goal, right? Is it climate science? Is it environmental science?
Right.
Is it something else? Is it rewilding? And he said, actually, the goal is learning.
Yeah, I took a note on that where I was like, yeah, it wasn't just about, it wasn't really about the main goal wasn't the doing. The main goal wasn't like saving the world. It was learning.
Right.
And I thought that was really good way of putting it.
Yeah, and if he's swimming in the butter, then yeah, he might discover that it can, or no, swimming in the cream, swimming in the milk, he might discover that it can be churned somehow that we just haven't thought of, because we are mice living in...
2 mice, Frank, fell in a bucket of cream.
I'm sorry, I really like the parable.
It's a great story.
It's really good.
Catch Me If You Can was a wonderful movie at the time.
The other thing I wanted to say is just like, well, there's some, we'll get to that in this statement, but did one of my favorite things here, which is being corrected and having some of the things that I assumed were true and updating my knowledge to something more accurate. So there were definitely a few things that he said that either gave me more context or outright like corrected some fallacies that I think we talked about in the episode.
Right.
So we will get to that. Another big thing that came up was biodiversity. That's something that came up in our episode on Pleistocene Park, but it came up, of course, in this interview as well, which makes sense because, like, that's kind of what Pleistocene Park is all about.
Right.
It's based on this idea that there is this sort of less productive, non-productive forest ecosystem. That's this invasive sort of ecosystem in the Siberian tundra, and the way to turn that into something more productive and more environmentally friendly is basically diversity, right? And so with a lack of that animal diversity, the forest took over from the grasses. But then when you start bringing that diversity back, all of a sudden those things change, right? And we talked about this on the episode, but animals, plants, and even the inanimate objects that they find themselves living around are all interconnected in this web of relationships. And it's really those relationships that are almost more important than the individual organisms themselves. Right,
yeah.
I thought it was funny that he said he was not the biggest animal fan.
Well, it's like, what does that mean? You don't like him?
I mean, I doubt that he hates animals. It was just funny that he like works with animals and he's like, yeah, I don't care about animals.
Right.
But I guess I get it. I mean, if you work with them all the time.
Sure. Well, he said like explicitly, my focus on this isn't like, it's not about making a better world for the animals. It's about making a better world for humans. And ideally, we can make a better world for every living thing. Mm-hmm. But for him, it was like, I do it for the kids, like future generations, first and foremost. Animals are tools. Let's make a system to benefit humans. Like that was more the priority. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think the thesis here, too, is a little bit like, yes, we're doing this for humans, but as it turns out, you can't actually do it for humans without also benefiting animals and benefiting biodiversity.
A rising
as well.
Ecosystem lifts all boats.
Yeah, that's right. And then the other thing I just want to mention about diversity is that I assumed, and I think I said this in the interview, is that diversity was just about resilience, right? Because the more different diverse species and all these different ecological niches that are filled in the ecosystem, if some of them die off, then there's other ones to sort of like take the place.
Right.
And so therefore, diversity is more about like weathering shocks to the ecosystem.
Right.
While that's still true, he also added that it's about efficient use of resources in the environment. So when you have less diversity, I just use the word niches. Basically, an ecosystem is just full of these different, what's called these ecological niches. And the more diversity you have, the more of those niches are filled. And so a niche is just like, imagine, it's the best example is like a giraffe, right? So there's a niche for like an animal in an ecosystem to eat leaves off of really tall trees. So if you have a giraffe, then that fills that niche of tall tree eating.
Right.
And now those resources are actually going to use, and they're being recycled back into the ecosystem via the giraffe's shitting. Yeah, and for a giraffe, the shit is like from however 10 feet up, so it just splatters everywhere.
It does splatter everywhere. It's not necessarily a lot. Like, I can't imagine there's like a ton of
I don't actually know anything about giraffe poop, and now I want to.
No, I mean, they have a lot of fiber in their diet, so it's,
That's true.
As opposed to predators' poop, which might be, less frequent and more hard.
Speaking of predators and diversity,
he said that we are going to be able to see a saber-toothed tiger whilst driving to the grocery store, as I posited in the previous episode.
That's basically what I heard. I heard that, like, on the way in downtown Los Angeles, if I drive to Ralph's, I'm going to see a saber-toothed tiger just walking down the street.
He said it'd be good for the environment.
Is it going to eat people, or is it just going to be like having like a Gucci bag and like talking to their agent on the phone?
It depends. It's more likely he's going to be hurting the animals.
Okay.
As part of his predatory.
That's right.
Life.
Well, so here's another correction or elaboration. When I was talking to Kaylin when we were doing the Pleistocene Park episode, he and I were sort of just like pontificating about the necessity of predators and how important they are. And we were like, well, it doesn't seem like they're that important because, I don't know, there's probably other ways that they could successfully cull the population, right? They can like hunt them, or I don't know, they don't even want to cull the population right now because there's not that many. So, not necessary.
Right.
And what Mr. Zimov here elaborated on for us is that it's not just about predators keeping a population in check. It's also about the sort of the herding and shepherding value that they bring.
Right.
Because otherwise the herbivores will overgraze, and that's bad for them, bad for the grass.
They'll do to the grass what we did to the mammoths.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
But it's interesting how non-human predators, I guess this is not always the case, but the idea here is that you would need to introduce enough predators so that there's an effect, but not so many predators that overhunting occurs. And that's like, that's part of what is so difficult to balance in an ecosystem, which I think is, we also talked about how no one has ever really, quote unquote, restored a fully restored an ecosystem that's been destroyed or changed. And I think that's a difficulty of trying to balance it, is that you kind of got to get that just right. Otherwise,
right.
I mean, we overhunted. They're going to overeat.
Yeah, I think like sans humans, it feels like that's the type of thing that ebbs and flows over time and follows sort of a chaotic pattern from what I understand, as populations do sometimes have crashes and booms, and it's, and that's why is because there's so much feedback mechanism that we talked about on the show.
There's instances of like wolves overhunting the rabbits or whatever, and then there's no more rabbits left, and so then
the wolves die off, and then the rabbits build back up, and so on. But I think with humans, it's a little bit different because our ability to affect our environment around us is so much drastically more powerful than
it's powerful, it's complicated,
other predators. Like an elephant can knock down a tree, and that's cool, but like if we wanted to, we could knock down every tree. So I think, with humans it's weird, is because and the other thing is we're the only ones that understand that there is such thing as an ecosystem, right?
Right. Other animals probably have like an instinctual understanding, but not any sort of sentient or like what's the word? They cannot distill it into any sort of functioning information.
Right. Yeah, I mean, elephants may even have some sort of sense that they belong to some web of life.
Right.
I mean, actually, I've seen Lion King, so maybe they do. But I mean, they're not writing books about it.
Whales might be able to do it.
You think so?
I don't know. They're very complicated.
Whales are pretty smart. All right. Well, anyway, the point is, we're in a unique position with both the amount of impact we have on the environment and also our ability to sort of comprehend it at a logical level.
Right.
And so I think that sort of changes that balance. I think that's why there's such an imbalance when humans arrive versus when, like wolves overhunt.
Right.
All right. And then, so one of the things that we were sort of like glad to get his input on was the fact that that predators have this shepherding function, but there was also like this big sort of, I don't know if it's not correction. It's just, we had some really incomplete information from my research, which that is on me, but I'm glad that I reached out to him.
Shame.
Oh my God.
Shame. How dare you not have all of the information immediately?
Well, actually, I talked about this with him, is that it's not, I mean, there's, in all the articles and everything I read, they didn't really talk much about all of the things that the park was doing other than the trampling too.
Right.
Kalen did on his video on Atlas Pro, so hopefully you guys have watched that. So because he did talk about some of those things in his video.
Right.
But yeah, the permafrost trampling was like the main thing that, all of like the Atlantic and the Guardian and all those articles that I read were about. So I'm glad that I totally primary sourced this.
Right.
Because now Cult Are Just Weird is basically going to be the most accurate journalism out there for Pleistocene Park. You know
There's 4 different things that they're focusing on. It's not just trampling the permafrost.
Right, yeah.
I couldn't tell you what the other 4 words, and then we just said it.
Luckily for you guys, I wrote them down. So obviously permafrost is the first one, so we can kind of skip that over. But the idea was that by trampling the snow has a much lower insulating effect to the ground underneath during the winter, so more stuff can freeze. So more ground can freeze into permafrost. So when the animals trample the snow, it's like getting rid of the insulation.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. The other thing he talked about, which I mispronounced in the interview, which is like super awesome that I mispronounced this to
embarrassing
my favorite celebrity scientist, but the albedo, I called it albedo. The albedo effect. So the albedo effect is just reflection of the sun. That's what albedo is. It's reflection of the sun's rays. So we talked about that a little bit with Kalen. He talked about how there's actually some strategies for climate change where they're just like, yeah, let's just throw like a big white tarp on the ground.
I like that one.
I like that one too. It seems pretty cheap and effective, but it's a slightly different than what they were doing at Pleistocene Park. Basically, what Mr. Zimov was talking about was that they are trying to alter the environment in order to produce an effect where more of the sun's energy gets reflected back into space. So basically, the idea is that the forest leaves are dark. So if you take the 10,000-foot view, literally, then a patch of ground that has forest on it is darker. A patch of ground that has grass on it is lighter, and thus will reflect more of the sun's energy back into space. And I forget the exact numbers he gave, but it sounded like it was actually pretty significant.
Yeah, it did.
The third thing he talked about was the productivity. So he was saying that Arctic vegetation has low productivity currently. He was speaking specifically of trees and moss and things that are there, that aren't grassland. So because they are low productivity, in other words, they don't use up a lot of energy and don't use up a lot of resources, they also don't need much water. And since they don't need as much water, they don't need as deep of roots. Grass is water thirsty because it grows so fast. And it is productive, so it does need deep roots. Why are deep roots important? Well, because the deeper the roots, the further they go into the permafrost. Why is that important? Well, when roots decompose underground and deposit their carbon, the deeper they are, the more likely they are to be locked in, frozen into the permafrost than they are to be at the surface and release their carbon back into the atmosphere.
Hell yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Hopefully I got that right.
Sounded right.
But yeah, he used the number 50x. He said 50 times more carbon is capturable by grasses than by mosses and trees.
Wow.
So you could call this a grassroots solution.
No. No.
I got you back. I got you back for your pun.
No.
At the beginning of this.
I quit now. No one's doing the podcast anymore.
This is just two fake people talking now. Oh, okay. I'll talk about the fourth thing. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. The fourth thing is methane capture. So
farts.
Well, farts from the cows. Yes, cow farts. But he says that basically when the grass ecosystems return to where there was moss, like when he first arrived in Pleistocene Park in that area, he said it was all damp and soggy, and he was walking in the moss, and they would squish under his feet. And he always had to wear boots because it was just squishy and swampy. And when you have more water, decomposition of biomass will turn into methane. When it's drier, you won't have as much decomposition of biomass into methane. And because methane is such a much stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, basically doing that trade for it's going to turn into CO2 instead of methane is a good trade to make.
Okay.
And he did mention cow farts. In his case, it's not cows, it's bison and horses and whatever.
Maybe a moose.
And maybe a moose fart as well.
I think they have some, it was the bison that they had recently. I think there's zebras there and camels. Probably some camel farts.
Oh, yeah, definitely. All of those animals are farting. Hopefully they'll eventually be mammoth farts. But according to him, the methane released by the animals is still less than the effect of drying the ground and not having methane be released from decomposition of plant matter.
Gotcha.
So there's 4 things that the park is doing. He said his favorite one was the thing about the deep roots. But I mean, the fact that it's like that sort of it's got this multi-pronged, multifaceted approach to
a diverse approach
is really cool.
Yeah.
But even cooler than that, they're learning and they're doing something. They're taking action and learning. And I think that's basically what it comes down to. And then sort of the last thing we talked about before, sort of talking about the let's learn and take action thing was his personal story, which...
The part that I wanted to know the most about, honestly, I'm not going to lie here.
And he was like so humble about, like predictably humble about it. He's like, oh, my story is not interesting. And I'm like, dude, your story is hella interesting. What are you talking about? He sounded maybe a little conflicted, like early in the interview. He sounded like it was actually a big challenge to do what he does. And he expressed the idea that, maybe, if I had known how challenging this would be, I don't know if I would have done it. But then later on in the interview... Which I want
to say, that feels very, like, human.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like a lot of us end up in places in our lives where we go, I'm content with this, I'm happy with this, I like what I'm doing.
Right.
Maybe I would have done something differently looking back.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's unique to him. I think it's just like we all play sliding doors.
Right.
Right? We all play the, like, what if game in our heads, and it sounds like that's all he was doing there, because later in the interview it sounded like he really didn't have regrets, which is awesome. It was funny that he was sort of led back to Pleistocene Park by, like, default. He was like, yeah, I finished college, all my friends were new programmers, and I thought that sucked.
Agreed.
And my dad was like, come back and save the planet. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's not interesting. That's not cinematic.
I know,
like, my
right?
Father,
that's totally cinematic.
That's the basis of, like, half of the anime.
Right.
Like, literally.
Right. So, Nikita, if you're listening to this, your life is cinematic.
We dig your story.
We work in Hollywood, so trust us. Actually, do you want to sell us your story? Can we do that? Can we sell this?
Buy the life rights.
Can we buy a life rights on a podcast?
We'll do it right.
But yeah, I also like sort of commiserated with the like, I don't want to program though.
Oh, yeah.
Because like I've even worked in.
That's you every day.
It's me every day, and like I work in like tech industries, and I'm still like I don't want to program.
Oh, so. Numbers. Yeah.
Numbers suck. Speaking of numbers, I also liked his answer about like we should be spending this money on other conservation efforts, and it's like, hey man, like this came from a tech bro. This money came from a tech bro from his like Bitcoin stash, so. That's fine. Like this, it wasn't like this 50 million was like earmarked for like saving orphans, and then we were like, no, let's make a mammoth.
I mean, I don't disagree though. Like, I think it's perfectly fine to have a reaction or a comment about how very wealthy people spend their money to quote unquote make the world a better place. It's not necessarily a criticism.
It is, but
feedback.
I feel like maybe this is just my own bias, but I frequently come down on the side of just do the thing.
Right.
Like, and I don't know. I don't know if that's me or if it's a legitimate thought that is in my head, but I do feel like most of the time when I hear we should have spent this on X, I kind of go like, okay, like was there actually like a decision that was made in this regard? Was there a committee where it was debated in like a clear and concise format about like the best place to budget everything?
Right.
And like the answer is always no to that because like that's not how the world works. The world works because somebody has an idea and they're like, I want to do this thing, I need money to do it, give me some money, they get money, they do the thing, or they fail at doing the thing. Like it's almost never like there's not like one sloshing bucket of money that we're like optimally prioritizing all the time across all functions across the world. Like it's much more chaotic than
there are worse things that these people could be spending their money on too.
Right. So I know I said this like 8 times on the interview, but thank you again to Mr. Nikita Zimov, for his time coming on the show.
It was a damn good interview.
It was a really good chat, and I love the fact that it wasn't just a rehash of what we talked about on the show, that he like had a lot of new information, corrected a lot of things, added a lot of things.
I understand so much more about it now.
So we don't have criteria again, unless you want to rejudge Pleistocene Park as a cult, do you?
I mean, I think it's even less of a cult now.
But we just talked to the charismatic leader, and he's very charismatic.
Well, is he the charismatic leader, or is he the mod on Sheila? Is he the number 2 who's really the number 1, or is his father the number 1?
I think he's definitely the number 2 who is really the number 1 at this point.
Interesting.
But the father was number 1 for a long time.
Right.
But they're both charismatic, so I don't know. Maybe it is a cult.
Also, it's not a cult.
fine.
It's pretty clearly not a cult. This is definitely a just weird, and it's like a positive just weird. I guess you want to crinkle some paper before we make the call. That's a terrible paper.
It's the only one I have in front of me. We need to find the old paper. We need to... whatever.
Terrible.
Close enough. That's our fake paper that has all of our criteria on it that we're totally not going to read.
Not a cult.
Not a cult. But it was a good chat with a helper that is learning
Right.
and taking action.
It makes me think of the last episode we just did with Matt Remsky, where he was talking about one of the ways to preserve his mental health, and for all of us to preserve our mental health is to find the people that are doing the hard work, answering the questions, being the helpers that Mr. Rogers once cited. So I think that the Zimovs are those people precisely.
They're churning that butter.
They are.
This is Chris.
This is Kayla.
And this has been Cult
Or Just Weird.